As Veski Chairman, Professor Barlow has been instrumental in recruiting a range of leading scientists and researchers back to Victoria to continue their research. He's been active in promoting science and innovation across the country. He has qualifications in both horticulture and viticulture from the University of Melbourne. His work investigates the potential impacts of climate change on agricultural crops, particularly in Australia's important viticulture sector. He's chair of the Expert Assessment Panel of the Department of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry Climate Change Research Program, is a non-executive director of the Australian Rural Leadership Foundation, former president of the Federation of Australian Scientific and Technological Societies, and was a member of the Prime Minister's Science, Engineering and Innovation Council. Prior to joining the University of Melbourne, he was Foundation Professor of Horticulture and Plant Physiology and Dean of the Faculty of Agriculture and Horticulture at the University of Western Sydney. Approaching now on the red carpet of Printers Solar Cells, Snow Barlow.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'm very humbled to follow two so distinguished scientists as Alan Trounson and Andrew Holmes, and even more humbled by having a red carpet. Food, we know the world is hungry for. But the global food equation is undergoing a once-in-a-century rebalancing as we speak. In 2050, there'll be somewhere between 9 and 10 billion people on this globe, requiring perhaps 70% more food than we currently produce. But that's not all, as Steve Jobs might say. There's one thing more. In the next 15 to 20 years, there will be 2 billion more middle-class customers for food in Asia just above us. In that, these customers will be all urban, and they will seek to buy their food in supermarkets, and they'll be seeking to buy more animal protein than they've been used to buying because they've got more money in their pocket. They'll be seeking to buy fresh fruit and vegetables, which they haven't had access to before, and they'll seeking to buy beverages, hopefully Australian wine. This rebalancing creates opportunities for Australia. On the other side of the supply side is the globe has dwindling supplies of available land and water. The land we do have is under pressure. It's under pressure from urbanisation, but it's always under pressure from nations that choose to subsidise biofuel production. In other words, the creation of energy from land that might have otherwise been used to grow food. And finally, as Andrew's already mentioned, we face a world with changing climates. And just yesterday, President Obama released quite a shattering assessment of the impact of climate change in the US, which had a lot to do with food production. So it's happening at present, and we know this because it's evidenced in the price of global food supplies. In the last 5 years, the Food and Agricultural Organization, FAO's World Food Price Index, has twice peaked at 100% more of what the former decadal average was. In other words, it was about 100 units and it went to over 200 units. It remains up at about 80% now. So, how should a smart country like Australia play in this new environment? That's the question in sustainable food. Just have a look. We are not the food bowl of Asia. Australia exports 70% of the food we grow, enough to feed an extra 40 to 50 million people. the world population increases by more than 50 million people every year. Clearly that's not going to add up. In southern Australia, we're basically occupying all the agricultural land and using all the available water that is available. So expansion into new lands, new rivers, new dams is not an option here either. So how should the sector, what are our advantages? How should the sector respond? And in doing this, as I move through this, there are amazing similarities, albeit in a very different field, in many of the things that Alan and Andrew were saying. Firstly, if you look at the Australian agricultural sector, it's well served with research and development. We punch about twice our weight in terms of research in publications internationally in agriculture, plant, animal sciences. We have an innovative, tech-savvy farm sector. They are pretty quick to take upon new innovations. But if we look at how it operates, we don't produce any of the hardware that agricultural sector uses. We don't produce the tractors, we don't produce the harvesters, despite having actually invented a couple of harvesters, a coffee harvester and a grape harvester. We don't produce them. We don't produce the milking machines that drives Victorians' dairy industry. We don't produce the bottling lines that bottle our wine. We basically export, not exclusively, but largely soft commodities to the world at a competitive price. The food industry probably doesn't like to think about it this way, but we're really not a whole lot different from the mining industry. We're very good at producing efficiently and shipping out in big ships. Where's our future? Our future is clearly not in a race for being price competitive. It has to move towards looking how we can increase the value of the things we produce in this Asian, and that's why we talk about this Asian explosion of supermarkets as the Asian dining boom. How do we get our products onto those Asian tables? In the commodities we currently produce, mostly they arrive in supermarkets not branded as Australian because they're manufactured elsewhere. So clearly what we need to do is we need to find ways to work on our natural advantages in Australia. And we do have some natural advantages. We have an agricultural industry that could probably increase its productivity over the next 20 years by something like 50%. But we need to move up that value chain and use all the smarts we have, drawing on across the sectors more than we do at present. We can talk to some of Alan's medical mates, and we need to produce projects on the supermarket shelf that have contingent health benefits, whether that happens to be a gluten intolerance, whether that happens to be a vitamin A enrichment, whether that happens to be a omega-3 fatty acid enrichment in a particular product. And that product needs to arrive there with a label that says Brand Australia, which guarantees a safe product, which guarantees a provenance that it has been produced in a well-regulated production system that has traceability involved in it and has authentication in its claim, whatever that might be. If it's a health benefit, it needs to be authenticated. It's not a spin, it's a reality. So what do we need to do? What do we need to do to make those changes? As I said, they're not remarkably similar. They're not remarkably different from the things Alan and Andrew have talked about. The first thing we need is we need a strategic bipartisan plan that doesn't wobble. And in fact, Jonathan, you stole my line from Brian Smith. As Brian Smith said in March, we can't wobble from electoral cycle to electoral cycle in terms of a strategic plan for how we're going to apply our science through to innovation in a smart country. We need a commitment. It may look a little bit different under different governments, but it's got to be constant, because smart people won't hang around if the money dries out. They are the people who are in most demand in the world. So, and that's indeed one of Veski's big businesses. Second thing we need, again, the similarity, we need a collaborative approach between our industries, our food industries, our agricultural industries, and government and the research institutions. We face a situation in Australia, as Alan said, that we evaluate our researchers according to how many publications they publish in international journals and how many times those publications are quoted. We don't evaluate our researchers in terms of the impact that they might have had in the development of new products and services in whether it be Australia or elsewhere. So there needs to be a more comprehensive reward system for our scientists that values people who work in translational science, putting science into action, as well as people who beaver-aid in the lab and make basic discoveries. There needs to be an equal value of those contributions. And finally, we need to go international as well. Australia has traditionally been involved in international agricultural research, but in a developmental context. We still have an agency that works strongly in the developmental context, and that should remain. But we need to form research partnerships that actually can help us understand the markets we operate in and the products we want to develop. We need to develop research partnerships with Asia, with China, with India, with Japan, with Singapore. These are our major markets. And these are the people who, Alan has said, and I agree, are major contributors to doing great science. It is not a developmental approach, it's a partnership approach that we need to do. So, finally, a smart country needs to develop a culture that can pervade the way we operate in our community. And Melbourne and Victoria is a great place to start this. It has a very fine tradition of research. It has a very fine tradition of networking across the community. That's what we need to do if indeed we're going to be a smart country in 20 years' time. Thank you.